have a very big role, and we hope, and we do, promote art criticism, protect ethical and professional interests of its members. We particularly want to encourage face-to-face encounter in a time that's very sort of split. We want to contribute to mutual understanding of visual art and aesthetics. That's hard work. For all cultures, even more hard. And to stimulate professional relationships, to maintain free access to galleries, and to defend freedom of expression of thought, but mainly, and also incredibly importantly, to oppose arbitrary censorship. So we're incredibly worried about the fact that people self-censor, and we're very involved in that. And IUK International has various committees that deal with this. I mean, IUK UK has about over 300 members now. But most importantly, we invited Manuel or Manolo Borja Villar, art historian and curator, to speak for us. And he was the director of the Museo Reina Sofia in Madrid until last year, 23. And most recently curated the 35th Sao Paulo Biennale, biannual, as they say. During his tenure at the Reina Sofia, he carried out a radical, amazing remodeling of the collection and created something called the Museo en Red, which is a network of organizations, collectives, and institutions that question the idea of the museum and expand its boundaries beyond the museum. And before that, Manolo was the director of MACBA in Barcelona and the Fundació Antoni Tàpies. And also massive congratulations, this is a bit creepy to congratulate you in this way, but you've just been awarded the CCS Bard Audrey Ermes Award for Cultural Excellence. And so that's very clever. So in a way, and they said about you that you embody the critical role of curators today in challenging accepted modes of practice. And we wanted you to do this lecture this year because things are it is necessary to talk about art in a political context, and it's incredibly important to deal with that subtly. So, how does a curator or anyone, any of us, engage with art, with the practice, with making work and showing it at this moment? And, there are two pretty famous wars going on, plenty of others. It's a highly fragile climate with elections everywhere. Everywhere, UK, US, Portugal, Algeria, South Africa, Costa Rica, this year. And that's talking about apparently democratic situations, also in Russia and India and so on. It's just a very, very tellingly difficult time. So I'm really excited to have you here, and I'm very, very much looking forward to this. Manolo is going to speak for about 45 minutes, something, or maybe less, and then we hope to have some questions. And then before I finish, I'd like to say thank you for hosting us here, the UCL, and I believe it's now the Post-Socialist
Art Centre.
Very clever. and also thank you very much, don't worry, I'm going to say it, to the Spanish Embassy for providing so much support for this event, mainly in terms of drink opposite at the end. So thank you very much, everybody, and welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here with many friends. It's a pleasure actually to talk about what I've been doing with lots of pleasure during these 35 years. And because I think now is, as Sasha was saying, is a moment of cultural wars. It's a moment where culture, museums, art is at stake. So I think we should be very clear where we are, trying to see what kind of solutions, what kind of propositions we can propose in a period of fake news, in a period where it's very difficult to say anything because whatever you say is already absorbed from the beginning, from the start. And it's a period where sometimes we are also accomplice of what we criticize. So I think it's very important to deal with all those things. My talk will have, I will try to be very synthetic, even if I change already 3 times the PowerPoint, and this is called PowerPoint and definitives, but still I think it's definitively too long. So I'll try to be synthetic, and also because my book about all these things is appearing. So if you like, when we finish with, I can take notes of everybody that wants to buy the book, and I will be very happy. Okay, now seriously. So, okay, this obviously will have 2 parts. One that is more, I have 2 hats, one as a curator and art historian, and the other one as director and manager of institutions for 35 years. And even now, if I'm not in an institution, in a way, I'm in Barcelona backing somehow some kind of institution to be. So, so that means that somehow what I'm going to propose comes out of attention, one from outside in, and the other from inside out. Outside in is very clear. I mean, we work in institutions. There are many ways to work in an institution. A museum clearly is one. An academy is another one, a magazine is another one. And when you work in an institution, there are laws, there are contracts, there is real estate, there are many things. There are even tickets, there are fees, and let's face it, all that is political. It's not artistic. I mean, how much artistic is to raise the tickets for the entrance of a museum, or how artistic is to precarize half of your staff. How artistic is not to be able to avoid it, how artistic is to, many of these things. So that's one point. Another thing is the work of art. That doesn't matter how much we want to, the work of art or the event or whatever, that we want to compress it, that we want to make it part of an illustration of a discourse, it always retreats from us. It has always something enigmatic. It has something that escaped to us. And that's also political in rather way. The friction between both things, I think maybe is what makes what we are doing special, and maybe is what it makes what we are doing so appealing, so attractive to the ultra-right and to censorship and to some censorship. So this is what I will be discussing. In that context, I'd like to point, if we are talking about inside out and outside in, immediately comes to mind the term of the frames. What goes outside, what is the frame, what is the border between one thing of another. So that means dealing with the space, that means dealing with time. In terms of time and in terms of space, the Greek had 2 terms to deal with place and space, which was, one was topos, the other one was chora. Topos, it was a term where the agent and the space, how they are separated. That means that the space is fixed and that you can move freely within the space. Topos is chora is a space that you create with your own body. You create in relationship. It's a space that is always in flow. It's a choreography. It's something that dances. It's something that moves. It's something where the rules keep on moving, keep on changing all the time. This is very important because it's about governance, but it's also about art. It's about academy. It's about being academic. It's about being creative all the time. And it's important because that comes to the title of the lecture. The title comes after reading once and again. In Spain, Mark Fisher has become extremely fashionable again. That's the case here. But he has that book where he quotes at the beginning Jameson or Zizek, nobody knows who said the sentence that is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So if that's the case, of course, you are brought to melancholy, you are brought to not imagining what it could happen after that. And then probably we have to think why that's happening, why we cannot imagine other worlds. We Europeans, we white people, we people from Western North, global North, because maybe that's not the case in other cultures, in other countries. And that's important because always it comes to my mind cases like Luis Agassiz, the famous ethnographic from Switzerland that went to the States, to Harvard. Christine Sharp actually mentions how he actually signed the sign in favor of freedom of Black people from the south of the States. But then, I mean, he was active in all that. But then actually, scientifically, with the frame that science and culture of the time, with the tools that he had, he actually determined that Black people, they were scientifically inferior than white people. So, where you are in favor of freedom or you are not. So these contradictions is something that is important to deal with, especially when we are dealing about institutions, politics, when we have to deal about imagining the future. And also that means that comes to the other, so that means about imagining cartographies for after the end. And that comes to the other part of the title. What kind of answer to that we might have? The answer I propose it is one that taken from Donna Haraway, but not only, certainly taken from Columbus, taken from many other type of practices. We call situated museum or situated curatorial practices. What do you mean situated curatorial practices? Situated, it means situated knowledge. It means a knowledge that you always share, a knowledge that is against the universal unique history, a universal unique history that whenever you are an outsider, whenever you don't fit in that history, you are relegated to disappear, you are relegated not to exist, to no existence, but at the same time, it also creates spaces where insubmission, where rebellion is possible. So maybe instead of thinking about a utopia, which is still far away from, is still with the parameters of the idea of time and space that we have, and therefore that utopia somehow condemn us to repeat the same place, the same context, the same world in which we are, and therefore it's impossible to imagine something else. Instead of that, a situated knowledge is a knowledge which is always interpolated. I know this word doesn't exist in English, but I insist in using it because if it doesn't exist in English, maybe you should have it, or maybe that's a problem. But it means, I mean, the word in English, closer to that, it will be questioning, but it's not the same. Interpellation is almost legal. Legal term. Interpellation means really questioning the basis of your thought. And I think this is quite important. And that happens when inside out and outside in, you question the frames of your thinking, the frames of your practice, and the frames of your governance. I've been director of things 35 years. So you can guess my age, even if I started in this when I was a teenager. And actually been accused several times of whatever, not doing art, not doing, or being political or being illegal. And I always got very upset when that happened, because normally it happened from people that I consider very reactionary, normally my trustees, people who have lots of money and all those things. But then with the years, it's not that I became rich, that's obvious. It's not that I hope I became reactionary, but then I began to understand them. So maybe they were right. Because once in the early 2000s, when I was in MACBA, the educational department, they were part of the anti-globalization demonstrations of the period in Barcelona. And at one moment actually I was sued. It was the first time I was sued by legally, and the board of trustees got very upset. And one thing, the president of the board called me and he said, "Listen, what you are doing is not in the mission of the museum. What you are doing is illegal." And I told them he was totally wrong. He was conservative, but actually maybe he was right. And maybe the problem is not that what I was doing or what we were doing, because it was many people, of course. It was breaking something or working inside a frame. Maybe the problem is the laws that they were ruling us. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe, yes, it was illegal and we have to question it. Because let's put it in a different position. In Mayan language and in other languages, the word art doesn't exist. So if they do a museum, if the mission of the museum says to promote art or to promote, they will do it. But for them, art, actually they have different words that are similar to what we mean for art practice. And these words, they are from craft, for things, doing things with your hands, from sanation, to care, to cure, to ecology. So what happens when in your art practice, you start doing things that have to do with curing, with sanation? What happens when instead of painting a landscape, you defend the landscape and then you do a demonstration, whatever? It's illegal, it's art, it's not art. For them, that makes no difference. And I think this is the point, because if the first time in the early 2000s, I was denounced for doing political, non-artistic things, then actually not too long ago, when this thing of sanation became after the pandemic very fashionable, actually we did a workshop in Reina Sofia about sanation, and then actually got a letter from the medical college saying that I had no license to do that, and that therefore I should watch out. So I think this is actually quite serious. And at the same time, it's also quite serious that maybe we should be conscious that very often the diversity institutions, of course fairs, of course perhaps galleries or whatever, that kind of difference very often is a difference which is stylistic, but it's not, doesn't change the frame. And I think this is quite important also to understand, because very often we are part of the problem. Very often we are giving an idea of homogeneity to something that is not, something that is complex, something that is rather different from what we propose. So, with that general thing, I would like to go. So that's, of course, Cuarón is this film where, according to Mark Fisher, it's impossible to go beyond any hope. So my talk, it will be in a way a response to hopefully to that film. So I will start as my talk will have two lines. One that in which I will try to do a kind of genealogy, which I invented, of this possible other time, and then another cartography, and then another one which will be discussing how to do that specifically in terms of a museum, in terms of a collection, and in terms of publics, in terms of agency, what in French philosophy they call agents. So it will be 6 moments of this imaginary time after the end. One, of course, it's imaginary to go backwards, because time is not linear; it's a spiral. So sometimes you are, events backward and forward. So you can going back, you can imagine the future. So Cairo, March 14, 1932. In Cairo, there is a big conference about music. As you know, Cairo got their independence from the UK in 1922, and in 1932 they decided to do a huge conference dealing with Arab music and dealing with vernacular music. The conference was full of major musicians, theoreticians from all the Arab world, but also Europeans. Bartok was there, Hindenburg was there. And the idea was two things. First, to create a kind of national, once they got the independence from the UK, the idea was to get a national identity in terms of music. And on the other hand, it was a will to modernize thinking, modernize academy, modernize science, everything. So they do that, and they start discussing, and they talk, and finally they got some conclusions. And the conclusions were that Arab music, and that's literal, it was terrible sounds. Sound terrible. Because it was not tempered, it had no notations like in Western music, they were improvising all the time, it was a mess. So they decided to get a notation which was Western notation, to systematize, to getting, even they say that Arab instruments, they were not precise, and it was better to use Western European instruments, and that was the conclusions. So, to get independence for that, I mean, maybe it's better to be a province, and then it's like better to be conquered again. Actually, that happened with República Dominicana. They got independent of Spain, and that's the only country that 5 years later they asked to be conquered again. Then actually they saw what was happening and they got independence immediately. So actually out of that, then you realize how very often revolutions are anything but not revolutionary. How often revolutions just are moved to stay the way they were, or to mutate colonization in something else. Actually, the Moroccan philosopher Adel Hatibi mentioned something which is double critique. They need to have double critique, a critique of ourselves, of our position within a system. And by doing that, understanding maybe we change things, but our position maybe is the same. And actually, we realize how even today there are many things that have changed. I mean, we'll see the Venice Biennial this year. It will be full of indigenous, Afro-descendants, which is actually some time. I think I'm happy with that. But that said, actually, the same director that is directing the Venice Biennial had problem in the Museum of Sao Paulo when he was doing an indigenous exhibition, actually, that happened last summer, for two things. One, it was academic, so that was not a problem, it was a discussion. It was that the exhibition was universal. That's kind of mixing up universal and very specific, is kind of a contradiction there. But mainly, there was a scandal because some curators, indigenous curators, they were fired. And they were fired because they were not, according to the museum, producing the documents on a timely manner. They were not producing the elements the way the institution was doing. But then, what was the timing, what was the way of working of Sandra Benitez and other indigenous curators? It's totally different. And they have a mechanism of time. They talk, they relate to each other different, they talk to their communities. It's a whole different process. It's not about producing, it's something else. So actually there was a friction there. A friction that, of course, at the end the museum was a scandal or whatever, but at the end the museum got the type of production they wanted. That has not to do with aesthetic results, but it has to do with processes. And that's very important, because often those things do not happen. The changes where things could be, there are things that do not need to be seen. They are objects, but maybe the objects need to be hidden. So there are big processes that are different from the ones we are using in Western universal encyclopedian museums with all their changes. And that, I think that's very important to keep in mind. So second moment, this is because I'm in England, so this is London. London, May 1, 1851, Crystal Palace. Of course, the Crystal Palace is about transparency, is about also order, is a way of putting order and making, getting rid of all the vernacular affairs. is linked to the panopticon that happened some decades before, because you can see from outside, you could see from inside, but it's also important because it's about the predominance of the optical. It's about the perspective where there is a unique point of view, the one that works, the one that is true, the one that is universal, and whoever is not in that point of view, that perspective doesn't exist. Whoever is transparent, literally, doesn't exist. And therefore, there is no relationship, there is no body, which is very, very important. And so this is an element that whenever we have to do with other times, is important to know, it's important to understand that when you have this excess of transparency, there is very difficult that something unexpected happens. And if nothing unexpected happens, then creativity has a problem, democracy has a problem. Third moment, Guatemala, October 2011. That's Marilyn Boror, is a Mayan artist, and she did an action in Guatemala that what she did is she was dressed in Maya traditional costumes. She went to the pedestal had fresh concrete, fresh cement, and before the concrete dried, she left. So what is telling us? First is telling us, we are historians, about history not being or document, not being just, of course, a neutral thing. A document is an element of history. A document is an element of battle. And a document or a memorial, we know through Foucault that monument and document, they are systematically, semiotically and systematically related. Because the monument could be the document could be critical with the monument. In the moment, instead of Marilyn, you could have Hernán Cortés. You could have had a conquistador with a horse, with a sword, whatever, killing indigenous people. You could even have a dictator, Rios Montt or whatever. And of course, you can remove it like the Soviets did during decades, and still they are basically the same. Or you can criticize ferociously, but still is the center. What happens with the people that has no documents? What happens with the people that are outside of the monument? There is a Brazilian artist, great Brazilian artist called Aline Mota, and she has done this film about his mother, because she has her father, Mota, comes from Portugal, and she was able to trace his history until the 17th century. Of her mother, the only thing she knows is that of her mother line, she only could go back to her grandmother, and the only thing she knew is that her grandmother was sold for X amount of reales or doblones or whatever. So the monument, the document, condemns her grandmother to be sold eternally. So how to tell a different type of history? How to tell what is outside of history? This is what Marilyn Boror proposes us, to think monuments, to think memory, to think history differently. And she actually goes further, because the monument is dedicated to rivers, to land, to non-humans, to people that actually, to elements that are normal in this universal extractivist type of history outside of history. And also what she's telling us is the thing that universal history, when you are not there, condemns you to invisibility, but also allows you insubmission, allows you to be upside of up on the pedestal and questioning those histories. Fourth, moment in this future, December 21, 2012. That's Chiapas, is where the Ejército de Liberación Nacional is. And that day, which according to the Maya calendar, the world was ending, of course, our world, not our world. In that day, 45,000 Zapatistas hooded and with a number that represent the town to which they are associated, the towns that they conquered in the 90s peacefully. They came out of the forest and they started marching in silence. It's called Marcha del Silencio, making a movement in espiral. And and then they disappear. What they are telling us, first, the espiral is a snail. A snail, caracoles, is the name they give to their own towns. It's a form of governance. A snail is also espiral, is a time. It's a time where time past and future bend in one way and bend into another. The way to imagine the future is the way to remember the past that you don't know. Everything is linked. So this way of understanding time, of understanding, they don't speak the fact that what is important is the silent body is an element which for them is important. And that allows us to imagine a time which the interruptions, a time where changes are possible, not in some kind of utopia, but in some kind of further away utopia, but in ourselves, in the towns, in the caracoles, which they govern. This is United States, late 19th century, and this is, of course, Emma Goldman. Since this is a fictional history about a future that goes back to the past, I'm going to say a sentence that for many years it was considered Emma Goldman said, but now I think it's clear that she didn't say, but it doesn't matter. The sentence is she's in a demonstration, she's in a public speech. It was that famous sentence where she says, "If I cannot dance, I'm not interested in your revolution." And that's important. And that's important because it points to something else. It points about how the bodies, especially since the 17th century, especially women bodies, become machines, become objects to be used, become enslaved in a different way, which means slave. Slave means that you are not subject. The one who determines your own subjectness, somebody else. And that somebody else that turning you into a machine is something that dance, movement, affection, contact with other is something that is opposed to. That's the fifth. And then the sixth and last one, that's San Francisco, 1987. And in that year, there is a book by Gloria Zaldúa, published called Borderlands, La Frontera de New Mestiza. That book is an extraordinary book because it's about borders, it's about diaspora, it's about Gloria was a great Gloria Zaldúa, a great poet, a poet that used to write in Spanish, English, Tex-Mex, Indian languages, everything mixed up. He's a poet that understands that spiritual, there could be a spiritual activism in the sense that there is a private and intimate element of poetry, of art, but that intimate element put in a public dimension in the border becomes activism. It could become both things. He has this incredible poem, which actually refers to that much better than I can say, so I will read it to you. To live in the borderlands means you are neither Hispana, India, Negra, Española, ni Gabacha. Eres mestiza, mulata, half-breed, caught in the crossfire between camps while carrying all 5 races on your back, not knowing which side to turn to, which to run from. To survive in the borderlands, you must live sin fronteras, to be a wrong. To be a fronterizo doesn't mean to be nomad, like it was popular in the 90s, when people were talking about Mario Merz, the artist, being nomads. It's not that kind of course romantic idea. To be in the crossroads has to do also with Yoruba, has to do with being in a place where identities, where ideas are always in gender, are always in flux, where you could be one thing and the opposite. And that's a choreography. That's also where you can move, where you can determine your own governance. And that's an element that is quite important. So we go to the practice. We're okay? Yeah. So going from this time to a concrete situation. There are 4 terms which I think are very important to point to. First, extradisciplinarity, which should not be confused with interdisciplinarity. Interdisciplinarity is between disciplines. You are between an idea of discipline, something that has rule. Extradisciplinarity is when there is a questioning, there is a interpolation. It's very easy. If you are in the Roman Empire, to be a slave, that's legal. So you need an extra point of view to understand that that's not legal. I mean, that could be legal, but it's not ethical. So this extradisciplinarity, this looking to us from a different point of view is essential. That links to the commons. The commons is about collective body, is about negotiating, is about things that you share, is about a knowledge that is always shared, that doesn't belong to anybody. It's also a knowledge which is about solidarity. It's a knowledge very often, I mean, that happened, that was another one time I was there during the pandemics. Some of the neighborhoods of the people, they asked us to use the museum was closed, to use some of the 65,000 square meters Reina Sofia has, some with 100, to store sandwiches, food, because many people, Reina Sofia is on the one hand in the golden mile of the museums, Prado, Thyssen, National Library, but the back is in Lavapiés. It's an immigrant, poor worker neighborhood. And during the pandemic, of course, they had no salaries, these people. So they had to go out to live. They could not go out. They were starving. There was food, but there was no places where they could get it. I could not do it because that was illegal. So this type of laws, where art could be formally solidarious, but has no solidarity, is something that with this structure of the commons is important to change. Then agency. Agency is not about giving access, which is extremely patronizing, of course. Agency is not about giving access, I mean, who are we to give access? Agency is about public people doing what in French they say agents, making themselves the stories, and by making themselves the stories, the works, in a way they recreate them and they make them alive. It's like Guernica. Guernica, according to Picasso, was certain type of things, many. According to the critics in the 30s, it was something else. But then when you see the history of Guernica, is of course an icon of the Republic. It's an icon of the Spanish Republic. It's an icon against fascism. It's also an icon for the Spanish exile. It was an icon for against the war in the Vietnam. It's an icon still today against in favor of Gaza. So those are agencies. That means that each one of those people that adds an element to Guernica and is part of Guernica makes the work their own. The work goes beyond Picasso. It doesn't matter that he was this kind of demiurgo type of artist, or was created with that. And then Enigma, which we already have referred to different times, which has to do, of course, with opacity. It has to do with the impossibility of knowing the other, and it has to do with the opposite. It's the opposite of this transparency that we were seeing in the Glass Palace. So, and I will point two instances in which we have tried to develop this type of situated knowledge, this type of imaginary chronology, imaginary space, imaginary history, this cartography at the end in a museum. One through the collection, that means through works of art, through parkour, through exhibitions, through narrative, through the works, and the other through properly situated public activity. So the collection. This collection, the collection had many instances during the years, so I will present here quickly the last collection in Reina Sofia that was very much debated in English. That's English. During in the last year, I mean, for the ultra-right newspapers, it was the end of the National Museum because it was criticizing national identity and all those things. So the collection, it was structured around 3 points. On the one hand, they had 8 episodes, and I will mention why there were episodes. The 3 points were first, there was an exercise of art history. An art history, I believe in art history in spite of all those things. An exercise of art history, of understanding how the works were received, perceived, understood in their time, not only in terms of documents, but in terms of what the Italian critic Enrico Visconti in the 70s, or later Frederick Jameson mentioned ambiente, or they mentioned affection. Something that is not only document, but you try to create an atmosphere. That's quite important because this atmosphere changes in the time. So that was one point, coming one line. Another line, it was today, from a today perspective. From a today perspective, you actually deal with issues which are quite important. Diaspora, in the sense that diaspora implies displacement, implies body, implies performance, implies action, implies these crossovers that were mentioned, these elements that I was mentioned in this genealogy that I just presented. And then the third thing, it was again the work of art, and that's important. And it's important also politically, even if it doesn't look political. I will give you an example which unfortunately I don't have images. We put 3 galleries, 3 spaces, one next to each other. One it was devoted to Carl Amstein, another one it was devoted to Georges Bataille, and the third one was devoted to André Breton. Carl Amstein, as you know, was the art historian that was so much interested in art in relation to life. I mean, he published in 1914 that book about African art, that for him it was not just a source of formal elements for avant-garde, but it was a source of this relationship that Western art had, or Western civilization had lost, of the intrinsic relationship between art and life. And he was very interested in artists that the museum owns, very much. Dalí, his idea of dreams and all those things, Miro and Picasso. Okay, that's fine. Then you go to the next room. You go to Georges Bataille, that you know is about fluids, it's about material, it's about all those things. No? And with the magazine Document, we do the magazine. But then he was interested, among other artists, on Picasso, on Dalí, and on Miro. So again, you have Picasso, Miro, and Dalí. It was different because in this case, it's the Dalí, for example, that it has the donkey, the rotten donkey, that it has fluids, it has blood, it has semen, so it's very different of the one which was more Protestant, if you like, of the Carl Amstein. Sorry for that. And then you have Breton, where you have Quirico, you have Magritte, but again, you have Dalí, you have Picasso, and you have Miro in a different nature. So, and it was not eclecticism, because the 3 guys, they knew what they were doing, and they were fucking great art historians, so thinkers. So when you go to the rooms, you know it's the same artist, but then there is something different. It's something, and that's really the enigma. That's something that makes the spectator needs to fix all that. And then finally, the collection was done in episodes, because in a way we thought that the same way that in 15th century, every period has a format, has a way of telling stories. 15th period was the tableau, 15th century. In the 19th century was the novel. In today is TV series. And in the TV series, you know that they are very often secondary actors. There is not really a major actor, or sometimes one major disappears, or there are series that aspects that are ending one moment appear in a different moment. So this disruptive thing is something that we started. The collection starts in 1881 and ends in 23. Actually, it ended in the future because we had some artists that we were dealing with the future. So maybe it's not finished yet. So, but the series we started in the 60s, and then we went back to the 20s, then we went back to the 80s. It was a different set of chronology. You could see like in a series 2-3 chapters, or you had the stamina enough, you could see that whole thing. So that was the way to deal with it. So those were the episodes. And I was just, we'll run quickly now. I will just go with one way to deal with all these elements. First, this is 50s Spain, when Spanish artists, Tapies, Aura, etc., or most of them male. They become very famous. They become famous in Spain, of course, and sometimes also outside of Spain. In America, they have a major show in MoMA. They got the prize in Venice Biennial, Paulo Biennial. It's a moment of big promotion. Actually, they were great artists, to say. So this is the way somehow they represent themselves. Of course, what it was not said at the time is that Franco regime was promoting that. Actually, this is a photo of Franco, and apparently they say that he was going through the revolutionary artists, Saura, Tapies, and the answer was, okay, as far as they do the revolution this way, that's fine. So, which doesn't take any, I mean, I work in the Tapies Foundation for 9 years. I'm not criticizing, I'm just showing contradictions that I think they are productive. And of course, these walls, this dark side, they reflected. This is post-war Spain. I mean, reflect a country that has a dictatorship, it has had a civil war, is back like in the 19th century. Curiously enough, they relate themselves with the American expressionists. They were part of that imaginary. And you see that the room in Reina Sofia, all of them have color, big gestures. However, the Spaniards, they present themselves in dark, tragic, black colors. And of course, that's if you were in Spain, I mean, that's a common place. That's true. That's part of the imagine they were trying to build. Because in a way, we believe this is Hitchcock. Rear Window is about looking and being watching and being watched. So in a way, it's about Cold War. It's about watching, it's about opticality, it's about trying to see how the others see us. This is a great film by Berlanga called Welcome, Mr. Marshall, and this is a town in Castilla, and they are waiting for Marshall, who will never come. And they are trying to dress to impress Mr. Marshall, and that's Castilla, which they are very dry, very serious, and they are trying to dress like flamencos, like people from Andalusia, because that's what they think the Americans would like. And also they dream of how the Americans will be, and they imagine them being cowboys. So it's about looking each other, about having imaginations of what the other would be. But in the meanwhile, they were forgetting what was happening somewhere else. This is in Latin America. This is Mondrian, of course, surrounded by Elliot Thick and Ligia Clark, that are trying to break the frame. Actually, at the time, Ligia Clark writes a love letter to Mondrian saying that she loves him, but at the same time, she says that he's very limited because he never broke the frame. And that's what they are trying to do. And what they are trying to do is seeing the world upside down according to us, not according to them. And this is important. And this is where art history and museums dealing with art history and dealing with our own history become important. I saw in Chile, an artist from Chile. 73, well, of course, it was the coup d'etat. A coup d'etat that in Spain in the 80s, it was received in a way they wanted to support it, they wanted to help them, and they did a major exhibition in support of Chile, of Chilean artists. So you have this blue painting by Mata, which unfortunately you don't see it in the painting, but is actually it has a reference to Guernica. And in a way, what the curators that were Spanish were telling him as an artist and everybody is that, poor Chilean people, they had a dictatorship, they had a coup d'etat like we Spaniards had in the 30s. And that was totally wrong because they were not in the 30s. They were not our past, they were our future. Because we know 73 is the beginning of neoliberalism. And what Nelly Richard, that was the curator of that, was telling us also in another part of the exhibition, is she was showing a work by an artist, Patrick Hamilton, that is composed of bricks, because the brick is the volume that Chilean economists, together with economists from the Chicago University Economic School or whatever, did to create a model of what neoliberal economy was. What she was trying to, what they are trying to say is that we were backwards, they were our future, and the rules and the tools, artistic tools, political tools, should be different. It's not enough. I mean, it could be, but it's not enough politically. The work by matter. Maybe what they have to do is those actions that women movements were doing in Chile and Argentina in the late 2018. And then finally, I will just show you one thing about Museo Situado. We have in the museum, we have created, we started with the idea that a museum is something that you inherited. The museum, the way we know, is an 18th century structure with all the mutations you want. And the structures you bend like that, but when you leave, and here we are curators, people that work in museums, you know that very often they go back. It's like bubble gum. They go back to the where they have really a great memory. But a museum could bend and also could help to create other structures. And those other structures, they could be structures of memory, structures of relationship, structures of joy, structures of aesthetic practice. And that's what we try to do with the Museo Situado itself, which is something that started in a rather traditional way. We went to this poor neighborhood, which is literally in the back of the museum, where Nubel did the extension of Reina Sofia. In that neighborhood is where he placed the garbage, literally. We try to change that. We try to work with them doing workshops, doing all these traditional things. But we created together with them an association. An association that they run. I mean, we were only one person there trying to interact. And they started asking things that had to do with governance, had to do with aesthetics, it had to do with labor issues. So, for example, they asked us to get the garden in Reina Sofia and to celebrate, because in the city you have the day of Saint La Almudena, the day of the city, the day of the country, whatever. But those communities, they don't have a day that they can claim their own. So they decided, they asked us that the garden should be their place for the place where they celebrate. So actually we did that. In this organization, many of them, they are illegal. And to go to a public library in Spain, you need to give an ID. So of course they don't want to give an ID, not because the museum will do anything, but if you give an ID, that means a passport, and you show you don't have this or whatever, eventually, I mean, the police is very strange, but the police can go there, and of course they never can. So the association created a collective ID. So all those people could go and could go to study. And then they study, they did workshops, but then they say, okay, now you are very good. But now we want to have real useful knowledge. What do you mean real useful knowledge? It meant that they wanted to learn how to create grades and how to handle works of art and how to create a cooperative so they could install our works. And they created, of course, then the laws of the administration, they're complex, but that's a different story. And also because this type of fights, either we go together or you cannot actually help each other. they joined forces with another group, another collective we work with, Institute of Radical Imagination, to ask for UBI, Universal Basic Income. So that's where they joined forces with union, with other movements, and all that was happening in the museum. And then they worked with artists to create a different type of artistic practice. In that case, it was with Alejandra Riera. They got the garden of the museum, that if you have seen it before, actually was this kind of 18th century garden which actually was totally anti-ecological. It was false. And they decided to do a garden that had to deal with the local dry climate of Madrid, but also a place that it was ruled, cared by the community, by the gardener of the museum, by curators, by the neighborhood, and they created a community, they created compost, they created seeds, and they ran all that place. And in addition, they work also, they ask artists to work with them. This is with Dani Selko, who does this kind of collective poems. At one moment during the pandemics, there was somebody of the Lavapiés community that died because he could not communicate with the health system by telephone because he didn't speak Spanish. So he died because the language. So they decided to get together and started to create a story of how this happened. So the artist, the poet in this case, was going with them one and again, and was trying to create this kind of collective history that at the end became a kind of manifesto from them. And then finally, and this is really final, we did a rather traditional but I think very nice exhibition of the path to Guernica. It was called, where we show all the paintings of Picasso going to Guernica. And then we did seminars, that's normal. We're a national museums, we did things in Madrid, but we decided to do things in other places. So we went to Malaga, that, as you know, is a city that calls itself the city of the museums. They have a Picasso museum, they have an Hermitage museum that now I don't know how they call it, but they call it something else. They have a Pompidou museum, they have a Thyssen museum, and they have many. But it's easier because the Picasso museum has only 35 works. So it's easy to do many museums, but it's for tourists. It's actually making the city very expensive. People from there cannot live there. So when you do, so there is the place which actually is more alive is a squatter house called La Casa Invisible. For 2 decades already, they've been doing great activities, seminars, talks. But for them, Picasso is not an artist. Picasso is a brand. So they say, okay, you come here, we talk, we discuss, but you discuss in your museum about Picasso and art history. We want to discuss Picasso as a brand and Picasso as a real estate element. So this is what we discuss there. And those are the different levels where a situated institution can develop different models. And that's it, more or less, for now. So thank you.
Brilliant. You skipped a lot of pictures there.
Yeah, why?
Why? Oh, because of time.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. That's very
And
disciplined.
this is the end definitive.
Anyway, we have some time to, because of the skipping, we have time to ask questions. So do contribute in any way, and you don't have to ask questions, you can also contribute. So has anyone got anything to say? Jonathan.
How is the garden now?
Actually, the garden is I have to say, it depends on the moment of the year, because it depends of the when it rains, it's beautiful. Half of them is taken, is occupied because they went. Actually, there was a big struggle with my trustees. They actually were very upset. So that was taken step by step. Now is done. The communities of the artists, of course, is not there, but the community is actually getting stronger. They do things and I have to say that in two terms, in aesthetic terms, it's actually very beautiful. The other one is kind of silly garden with a fountain. You know, it's actually a garden that it was actually silly because it's like Maria Corral did somebody during Maria Corral period did a dinner there. And it was the moment where there was lots of money in Spain. So they said olive trees and whatever, and they keep them. So there's somebody, Vicente or whoever, gave us an orange. So it was actually kind of a monster. Eh? So actually by changing that, by adapting that to the area, it became actually natural. It became, but especially what is important is that there is really a community growing out of there. Also, I have to say, talking about precarity, and there is lots of precarious things, among other things, because the system forces you to do certain things. All this, I have only spoken about like Visible, la Fundación de los Comunes, or about the Museo Situado. We did agreement with them, so they had money. We get the money for them to do activities. They manage to get support from other places. And actually, they run by themselves. It's not a one-time structure. It's not like a biennial that you ask somebody to do something. It's something that stays every time. So to answer to your question, you asked me, I think it's beautiful.
Contributions, please. Oh, and also, why were you interested?
Well, because, I mean, the point that you're making, I mean, sometimes these things happen as projects, for a biennial, some kind of festival, and they're not sustained. And I also wondered what it would be like after you left.
Yeah, that's the thing that I became. I had European melancholy when I left Brazil, when I finished the biennial. I really enjoyed working with my colleagues, and I really enjoyed them. It was for me, that year and a half is very important. But the only thing I really regretted is that if you are in a biennial, you do the container, you do the biennial is the biennial. For example, we introduced Cocina 9 de Julio to do the restaurant. That's an occupied place in Brazil. So they were in Sao Paulo. So they were doing the kitchen, they were the restaurant. So actually that was a major statement because every Sunday they do free food for people. And they did activities, but still, once you left, you left. The only thing, so that's why I think it's important this double movement. So otherwise it becomes, our position as curators and historians becomes difficult. And actually there are many collectives that they are up to hear of us in the sense that they want us to go back and because then it's like using. So in this case, I mean, there are mistakes, of course, and there very often they are frustrated instances, but the idea is always that it stays, forever. So it's
So they continue independently.
Actually, have to say that even so, I will not be pessimistic. Even that's for example, the biennial that it had a system that it was a little bit, let's say, neoliberal, if you want, or traditional, that the biennial has touring exhibitions. They do fragments and they travel the exhibitions, they get money, and traditional thing. Since Lula is in Brazil, they change something. They still do them, but first they pay for them. They don't go with one exception that they have already agreed, which is Lula. That's not very poor people. But anyway, with that exception, they go to Luanda in Angola, they go to Bolivia, they pay for it, and also they help. The idea is to continue to create institutions there. So even, let's say, traditional models, it's important to think the institution because there are possibilities there.
I was wondering if over the 35 years.
Can you stand up because people won't be able to hear? Sorry,
I'm standing up, so.
but so people can hear.
I was wondering if you could reflect broadly over your years as a museum director and whether you feel like your role as a director changed over those years, not just with the institutions you were in, but in general.
Okay, it was an evolution, and it's not that we had a plan. I mean, maybe because there was many, it's been always, I know, many people who have been in Madrid, but there's always lots of artists, people in those institutions. So, and the change has been progressively. I mean, I studied in the States with Klaus. Benjamin was my friend, he's my friend, so I came from that tradition. But being Spanish, I mean, I thought, so I studied Brotars, that's what I like. I like them and I still like them, or Coleman, but actually being Spanish, I felt like I should deal with tapis. So I started doing my dissertation on tapis that made my colleagues very upset. And that's how I started in the Tapis Foundation. And then we started growing. First thing, he was criticizing Tapis himself as having a monographic museum. He paid for it actually. But, and then we started doing, exhibitions like Ligia Clark, like Brotars from a different point of view. But we started, that was the time where Barcelona was creating this image of beautiful city. I mean, there was one moment where the city created did some kind of statistics, and 90% of the people thought that the city was beautiful, that the governments were excellent, and 90% that people even in Bulgaria. That's actually quite a unanimous amount. So actually they create an engineering of consensus. So in that, we started building with neighborhoods that were outside, that were never part of the story. So it was beginning to do something. So that was the beginning, trying to create this kind of collaboration. How we did that in Tapis, in political terms, that was easier because it was just, I don't know why. I mean, he became like my, he adopted me. He became like my father. I became part of the family, so we had huge fights. And like when you have fights, but in a friendly environment, that it happens. That actually sometimes for 4 months we didn't talk to each other. And you imagine being in the date and not talking to the person of the board. I mean, that's for 4 months. But in that case, we knew that, so either he called me or I called him saying, listen, maybe we should have a coffee. And so that was the way the structure was done. But it was limited because whatever you do, the reference of the figure was there. So I went to MACBA. And in MACBA was a public institution already with a regular board of trustees. So the affection didn't exist. I mean, politicians, they have you with one hand, with the other, there is nothing you in the back. So how we did that is by creating a public program out of which the independent study program, which still is active, by the way, happened. And this program was, as the word says, independent. And the board actually approved it, believe it or not. So it had their own dynamic, and therefore it was able to get mingled with anti-globalization demonstration, because where all at the time was Beatriz was starting doing her workshops, and she started growing. And at the time, the program, the idea was to create outside structure that had to do more with thinking, with questioning, with ideas, with education. With Reina Sofia, we did a step further. It was first collection. I mean, really, the idea was to start creating a different type of narrative. Then bending the institution to create this kind of autonomous organisms that they exist. And then finally, and that's why in my last year, the ultra-right, when my contract expired, became really, really aggressive. Actually got more front covers from the conservative newspaper than the socialist president. We have 8, one after another, saying all kind of nice things about me. And because at one moment we changed the bylaws of the museum, and they were approved by the parliament. And the bylaws said that the museum has 3 organs. One organ is the minister, and the minister can fire or hire the director, and can cut the budget or add budget. The budget is what it is, and it's public, their salaries, so normally, actually, the conservative government, they cut it by half, so that they can do, but still, if you are smart, you can do things. And then, they can fire you, but if you have a contract, I mean, that could be illegal, at least you can explain it, at least. So that's one. The second organ is the Board of Trustees. And of course, the Board of Trustees approve or doesn't approve everything. But the Board of Trustees cannot talk anything artistical. They can approve in terms economical, in terms of legal elements, if you do a contract that is not legal, if the money doesn't work out, if suddenly there is no visitors or whatever. But otherwise, actually, it's really, I mean, you don't go to prison, but it's a kind of a crime. You can, they cannot talk about. Actually, sometimes at one moment I had a very conservative board, and very often when they wanted to discuss an exhibition, they left. And that was their way to not to approve it, because then you had a, and then the director has a lot of autonomy. That's why at one moment you wonder why those newspapers, they don't, you know, you have to fight to get a review of an exhibition, and then suddenly you are in the front cover every single day. Is that because it became a tower to turn down. The truth is, we were the first, then it was Sevilla, now probably you heard Valencia, and it's going on. And the strategy is basically the same. It's like, I'm sure they have like a book or something. One is they throw shit in their newspapers they control, saying that you are doing or whoever illegal, something that is not correct. And even if you prove that is not the case, first takes, you know, you go to court, it takes like 2 years, but it doesn't matter because they already put it out. And then once the doubt is there, they start saying that there is a bound that needs to be healed. That needs to be healed, and therefore they have to change and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And that's the way they proceed. So when I started at one point, so anyway, that's more or less an account.
I'm just going to take.
You mentioned your affection for Brutal, and you curated 2 very significant Brutal shows in your career.
People can't really hear.
I was talking about Brutal and the exhibitions that Manuel has curated over his career. And I'm wondering about whether Brutal might be a model in some way for your idea of a situated
Actually, that's actually one thing that always struck me when I started with Rotas in the first years of the exactly is the museum. It's clear. But something that struck me is when, you know, he did the Winter Garden in the Palais des Beaux-Arts, which is extraordinary, but in a way it's melancholic, in the sense that he knows that it's the end of something, but he's unable to, he needs this interpretation. I don't think he's able to see something else. That's, but of course, this the idea of the museum is there. Of course.
Right. Yes, I'll try and say out loud. So you mentioned that this year's Venice Biennial that we should expect to see a lot of indigenous artworks and works by Afro-descendant artists as well. I was just wondering whether you think that national art museums, how long will it take them to also put some or most of the classic artworks of the modern art canon back into the storage and really change things around in the collections?
Well, that's an issue, like restitution, decolonization. That would be like 2 or 3 lectures. But first, I think the only moment they will be able to do that is when they change the idea of national, because that's already nature problem. They should be called relational or whatever, because national or well, like for example, in the Catalan Museum of Barcelona, they have these Romanes frescoes as the origin of Catalan nation and Catalan. But you know, in the medieval ages, there was no nation, no Catalan. there was no nations, and there was never no borders were. So I think this is a major issue. And then it's also not a matter, I would be careful, I have major discussions with my colleagues in Brazil, because very often they didn't care about me, which was a lesson of humbleness, actually. But I don't think it's fair in the sense that Fanon, for example, was very important for us in Brazil. But the introduction to one of the two books by Fanon was written by Sartre. And Fanon was fighting with Stotons, with many other. So that's there, and you have to be. So I don't think it's a matter of changing one thing for another. It's a matter of changing the frame, of doing a choreography. I mean, a choreography is about relationship. So I think at least we change that. So if we don't do that, we might not have, let's say, a national museum of French art or British art or whatever, but we might have Basel Art Fair. So I'm not sure what it's worth. So I think it's about relationship. It's not about, it's like Catherine Durham, when she did all these dances in the forest, taking with of Caribbean, Afro descendant people, and it was really great. And she had lots of success in the States. And at one moment, she was in the scenario, and she stopped. They were applauding her, and she said, "Okay, nothing will change until I'm there, and it's in the audience, and you are here." So I think it's about changing really the models, changing these topos and moving into choral, to choreography.
I think we should stop soon because we're going to cross over the road to have some refreshments. I just would like to ask you quickly, and I'll ask you quickly, and then you'll answer fairly quickly. What are you working, as they say to you, one always, what are you working on now?
Okay.
Thank you.
My title has 3 lines, so it's difficult to describe, but to make it simple. What they asked me, the government in Catalonia is an independentist, leftist independentist. They are right-wing suprematist independentists, so they are leftists. And somehow what they asked me is, imagine what it would happen. Could you imagine what it would happen the day after? Imagine, I mean, maybe we will never get independence, but that's not the issue. The issue, because the independence is always relative. Independence of whom? I mean, if you independent yourself from the Barclays Bank or from the Banco Santander, but then you move to the Sabadell, to the Banco de Barcelona, for that, I mean, maybe we don't need independence. I mean, maybe we just go to a bigger bank and then we have maybe better. So maybe independence is to help Spain to independence of itself, to help people to independence of their own history, their past, their known future. So this is what they asked me to reconsider and to, I mean, basically what I've been trying to do in Reina Sofia, but in a larger terms. Cool. Next year the elections.
That's very cool. That's cool. Thank you very much for a brilliant lecture. I mean, really fantastic. Thank you all for coming.
I'm serious about the book.